sport. Think about this. We took this company that wasn't allowed on pay-per-view, and our goal was to get it on free television. People were like, you're insane. You'll be lucky if you get this thing on pay-per-view. Porn is allowed on pay-per-view, okay? But this wasn't allowed on pay-per-view. So we get it back on pay-per-view, and now we're trying to figure out how to get it on free television. And roadblocks everywhere. Nobody, you know, I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you, you know, Hollywood, to me, you know, all these television executives are a bunch of pussies. Seriously, these guys, nobody has an original idea, and everybody's terrified to try something new because you might lose your job. Because you lose your job like that in Hollywood, okay? So nobody had the balls to put this thing on television, okay? So we said, well, how are we going to do it? We need something, you know, to get this thing on television. You're watching mixed martial arts without actually thinking you're watching mixed martial arts. So we came up with the reality show idea, and The Ultimate Fighter was really our Trojan horse. Putting this reality show on television, you know, but the way you get kicked off is you have to fight, and then the loser has to go home. So we did it. We actually funded the first season ourselves. We paid for the production of the first season. We get it on television, and boom, instantly crushed all the, you know, misconceptions about the sport and its athletes. But it is crazy enough. The sport is that exciting, and the first time you've ever been able to go behind the scenes with real fighters of a real organization and see what goes on. And it was fascinating to people. Some of our big superstars out there right now, like Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes and, you know, Randy Couture and these type of guys, they came from one style. They came from one style, whatever it was. The kids that are training today, this already is the most exciting combat sport in the world, if not the most exciting sport in the world, okay? Now, you think about all these guys that are big superstars right now that come from one style. The kids that are coming out today are mixed martial artists. These kids are learning everything from when they're young. This sport's just going to keep getting more and more and more exciting. There's a lot of smaller level shows, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And everybody's goal is to get into the UFC someday. When you get into the UFC, that's when you've made it and you cement your legacy if you become a world champion, and that's where you make your money. So there's smaller fights like that all over the world, and we really do a good job. We have our finger on the pulse of what's going on in all these smaller shows, and that's where we pick our talent from. What happens is a lot of these guys that we see in these smaller shows, we try to get those guys into the Ultimate Fighter for the reality show, because that reality show has become the greatest training ground for us ever. Because if you've ever watched The Ultimate Fighter, once these guys get in this element and live in this house with these other fighters, some guys crack immediately and they realize they're not meant to be real fighters, and they're gone. And the guys who are good rise right to the top. We figure out who they are, and not only do they become better fighters when they come off that show, but they're pretty much media trained. I mean, they've had a camera in their face now for 8 weeks. I'm obviously not, you know, I'm not a poor guy. You know, I grew up poor, but I have money now, you know. But I didn't get involved in this for the money. You know, believe me, if me and my partners got involved, because there were a lot of other things we could have done if we were going after the money. This was a sport that, when we got into it, we really believed in it. We believed in the sport and the athletes, these guys who compete in this. We decided to start the UFC Hall of Fame because, you know, there's 3 different eras of the UFC. When it began, or the original, then when it got taken off cable, which we call the dead years, then, you know, once we bought it, and the explosion again. So we just felt we'd start the Hall of Fame to celebrate these guys who literally put in blood, sweat, and tears to help the UFC evolve and get to where it is today. The 4 people who've been inducted into the Hall of Fame are Royce Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Randy Couture, and Dan Severn. Ken Shamrock was one of the original guys from the original UFCs. He became such a big star that he ended up signing with the WWE. Then he came back to the UFC when we bought it, and, you know, was a huge superstar and a good draw for us. Dan Severn was a big college wrestler out of Michigan. Him and Ken Shamrock had a big battle. He battled with Royce Gracie. Randy Couture, again, college wrestler, alternate on the Olympic team. He's always an underdog, and he comes out and wins. He's the first 2-time heavyweight champion in the UFC. One thing that people really love is the sportsmanship. You know, because of the martial arts background with this thing, most of the guys, you know, we have some idiots too that, you know, talk too much and do stupid things, but for the most part, all these guys respect each other. There's always great sportsmanship, and I think it's a breath of fresh air in combat sports. You know, for so many years we've seen guys couldn't fight each other unless they hated each other, and you know they want to hurt each other. And any of these guys you see, they'll sit down at the press conference right next to each other and talk to each other and shake hands and hey, and then once they get in there, it's a competition. It's no different than two teams playing each other and one team wants to win to prove their best. One of the things I love about this still is it's still so pure. The sport is still so pure. It hasn't been corrupted. 15 years ago, I was the guy sitting on my couch when a Don King fight would end, and I'd be like, that fight was fixed, you know what I mean? And now that I'm here, you know, everybody has these conspiracies about how they think fights are fixed. If a fight was ever fixed, you'd never promote another fight again a day in your life. It's so heavily regulated. Saturday, I just had an event in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we were at the U.S. Bank Arena. We broke every record there. First of all, gate and attendance. The gate is the largest gate they've ever done in the arena history. We did 2.54 million at the gate, which was 600,000 more than their highest grossing event ever, which I think was the Rolling Stones. And it's not just Cincinnati. We've done that in most of the venues we've done, not only in this country, but in the UK too. So as far as live attendance, I mean, we've broken just about every record there is. Then as far as television goes, this year in 2007, if you look at the top 100 rated cable programs, the top 4 are NFL. And if you think of the NFL, there's nothing bigger in this country than the NFL. I don't care if you didn't watch one football game all season, everybody watches the Super Bowl. Huge. So the top 4 are the NFL, number 5 is the UFC. And below that is, you know, Major League Baseball, NBA, NASCAR, you name it. Normally when we go head-to-head with any of them, we beat everybody except the NFL. The crazy thing is, when I throw those numbers at you, we haven't even scratched the surface of how big this thing's going to be. We're just, something inside of us is built for fighting. It's in our DNA. Now, I don't have to explain that to a guy in Russia, to a guy in Croatia, to a guy down in Brazil. We all get it. It's part of being a human being. I have fighters from the UK, all over the United States, Brazil, Croatia, Japan, Australia, you name any country in the world, I have fighters from there. And this is the only sport that I've ever seen where guys from another country will actually cheer a guy from a different country. Fox just did a study, and they did this story on how many women are into the UFC and how many people love it. And they found that girls are doing like girls trips to Vegas to go to UFC events. And when you look around the crowd, there's so many women there, it's unbelievable. Women either with their husbands or boyfriends, or groups of women who came on their own. And that was something, I mean, a lot of things when we bought and built this company that I expected. Hopefully if we, you know, you hope things are going to go the way you plan it, and, you know, hopefully if this works, we'll be here, here, and here. The one thing that I never expected and never thought would even be a factor was women becoming big fans of the UFC. It doesn't matter who you are, what walk of life you're from, you know, whether you're into martial arts or you're not, if you get this close to this sport, it's like the black hole, man. It sucks you in, and you just become completely psychotically passionate about it. And when you go there and you see the fight live, there's just this vibe and this energy that you don't feel or get anywhere else. I personally think it's going to be the biggest sport in the world.